Welcome to the Behind the Curtain podcast, your real-world guide to real estate investment and property management.
In this episode, we are chatting about the current health of the real estate market, and we make some predictions for the future. In Neighborhood Chat, we'll talk about some of the personal challenges we have and the busyness of doing business. And finally, we discuss a proposal by a Memphis City Council member to end SetOuts, the basis that it's making neighborhoods unsightly, but what are the alternatives and who will end up paying for it?
This is Aaron Ivey. In a segment you're about to hear, a reference was made to unemployment payments. It claimed that those entitled to unemployment could receive up to $4,000 a month. The statement is incorrect. At the time of recording on May 6th, 2021, according to tn.gov, the state of Tennessee government website, the amount a claimant could receive is capped at $275 a week. This figure is calculated on a sliding scale on the basis of how much the claimant's earnings have been during the prior 18 months. Temporarily, through the federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation Program, an additional $300 per week is available through September the 4th, 2021. In Tennessee, unemployment benefit is limited to 26 weeks and a total maximum benefit of $7,150. The unemployment rate is currently 5.9% on May the 11th, 2021, which isn't high in the context of historical data, and certainly not high in being in the midst of a pandemic. Real estate is still just the hottest commodity I think anybody could possibly purchase right now. The current marketplace, I mean, it is still absolutely just nonstop. You know, the multiple offer situation on every single property is through the roof. Product is not lasting on the market at all, and houses are gone before we often have an opportunity to take advantage of the listing. And you were saying before we even started our chat that institutional buyers are really flexing their muscle here in Memphis. And so it's very interesting for the individual investor to have to compete right now with institutional buyers like hedge funds and groups like that. So,
and even the owner-occupants. The worst competition for my investors. I have so many people looking to buy. Mm-hmm. Like I mentioned before we started the show that I put out 12 offers and got one.
Yeah.
I know,
That's great.
I felt like it was a win.
Yeah.
Every single one we lost to folks that are paying $8,000, $9,000, $10,000, $12,000 over asking.
Right.
And listen, there are a lot of agents out there that just want to sell a house. They don't care if it's a bad deal for their investors as long as they're selling a house.
Right.
Most of the ones we lost were my fault because I told my investors, I said, listen, I can't in good conscience tell you to pay $90,000 for this house. I said, because I ran a CMA and the closest I can get is $79,000.
Right.
You're going to be upside down the day you close. And if the market bubble bursts and we lose 15% or 10% or whatever it's going to be, I said, you're 5 years before you break even again.
Right.
And I would rather lose deals and be smart with my investors' money, right? That's what they hire us for, just to guide them, instead of going out like some of these other agents and just buying stuff because it's there. Well, regardless of price.
So that actually raises a question for me. One of the things that I've thought about a lot recently, especially in this last year to 18 months, of houses selling for more than what we feel is their practical value.
Yeah.
You know, in a normal economy, the question is, what is the value to the buyer, to the investor, of overpaying for a property? Because I'll tell you, I really think that there's a value there.
There is
in this marketplace,
and I do have one investor that's buying using the 10% gross annual rule. Right?
Is that Mike?
Yeah, he's broken the 1% because he realized, look, going after 1% in this market's damn near impossible.
Sure.
It really is.
Oh, yeah.
So he's now going 10% gross. So if it's $12,000 a year gross, he'll pay $120,000.
Right.
Now, when you run the numbers on the ROIs, a lot of investors will pay more because the market rent allows them to justify the purchase price. We are looking at properties now that are under market on rent, but market rent is $200 higher. So, so you're buying it based on what you can do with it a year from now.
Right.
And that's picking up property that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have one investor that says, look, it's producing enough ROI for me. So I'll pay $10,000 over what they're asking because it doesn't matter to me.
Right.
Because if you're holding it for 20 years, who cares what the value is? You know it's going to far exceed that in the next 20 years.
Sure.
You're more concerned about the annual rate of return. And if it works, then you can pay over asking.
Right. Right. So, I mean, I think that's shifting, that's changing. You know, I love Mike's 10%, you know.
Oh, I do too. It makes my job so much easier.
Right. But I mean, the reality is, I think that we're realizing for normal investors that there is a value in overpaying for a piece of real estate.
Right.
One of our investors that we work with, he buys a lot of property, is in the process of selling several in order to reinvest it into another outside of Tennessee investment. And, you know, we're really happy for him that he's done that. We definitely feel like he's, you know, selling at the top of the market. He's not selling all of his property. He's only selling about a third of his Memphis owned property. And of course, he probably owns so much more real estate all across America. But the point that I'm making is those properties are going to sell to investors. They will not sell to owner occupants because, as you've pointed out, owner occupants are now fighting investors, and especially these institutions that are coming in and are offering over asking.
It's a double-edged sword because his properties are under market on rents. And I understand why he does it because I've got good tenants. Why run them out?
Well, there's that. And let me quick point. Rental inflation has happened as fast as property sale value inflation. I mean, it's just 10, 15%.
His average under market is like almost $200. Some of them are $300 on the market.
Sure.
That being said, his problem is going to be is that some of these don't expire till October.
Right.
So the disparity between what he can sell them for versus what the rent is so bad, so off, that the ROI for an investor buying is like 5%. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't make sense. So there's going to be some of those are going to be tough sells. He's going to have to take lower bids on them to get rid of them, or he's just going to have to send out 30-day notices and vacate them and then sell them if you sold them on open market based on market rent, he'll end up 20% more than what.
So this is where I'm going to disagree with you. And I know you love that. I know you love a little simple argument, a little argument. I believe that the buyers that are out there right now are going to purchase them over asking because it is accessible real estate. It's real estate that is for sale. And even though they've got a tenant that for 2, 3, 4 months is going to be paying under market rent, it is still valuable to the buyer. It's still worth it to the buyer to go ahead and purchase it and get into a bidding war. I think the tenant now, you know, for these institutions a lot of them are wanting to do flips or rehabs or, you know, add value to the property through updating it. And a lot of Jack's properties, you know, the internal like kitchens and bathrooms, you know, fixtures, they're all like 20 years old, 30 years old. If it's like, you know, Cordova level property. So the point that I'm making is I see buyers, especially in this marketplace, in the current economic climate, dealing with that under market rent and dealing with that tenant because, you know, they're just going to ask them to leave. So yeah, it's really interesting. Would you say that we are in a panicked market?
Yes.
Yeah, this is a panic market.
I don't understand why we're in a panic market. I mean, people are buying property like Joe Biden just signed an executive order that says after May 31st, all homes that are vacant are going to be mowed down to the ground and you're no longer going to be allowed to ever build another house as long as the world exists. That's how people are buying. They act like, you know, or they're buying the last bit of bottled water on the planet Earth. They're just snapping it up and they're paying ridiculous prices for it. I don't understand why that's happening. Other than the fact that I did hear one investor say Biden's economic policies are going to drive inflation, and therefore they're hedging on buying up property today and inflation taking those values to an even higher point, at which point they'll try to liquidate and then make a profit. However, if Biden gets this 1031 exchange thing through, then they're all going to end up with a bunch of property that they've overpaid for, and their whatever profit they're going to make is going to get eaten up in capital gains taxes.
I am the last person to understand fiscal policy. Okay, like, I mean, whether or not it's good or bad fiscal policy, I don't know. I know that the United States is poised to experience record levels of inflation.
Yeah.
And so, which is basically a devaluing of our currency. And so that's one of the reasons why they're pushing the $15 minimum wage. That's one of the reasons why they are, Biden. I don't know if Biden's policies are meant to control inflation or not. I always thought that was the Fed's, federal banks.
Well, the only way they're going to control inflation is by raising interest rates, which is going to slow down the economy, which then could actually have a rubber band effect. And we go through this period of ridiculous pricing, and then all of a sudden we snap back into a recession that becomes even more detrimental.
Right. And so it almost begs the question of whether or not, and I hate to say this, this country needs a recession.
One's coming.
Might be a good thing.
I mean, if you look at every time in my lifetime, in the history of a cycle that we go through, when you see this type of just take property values, for instance, going through the roof and people buying left and right and just getting whatever they can get their hands on, driving up prices. Eventually, that's going to pop. And when that pops, we're going to go back into a recession, because as soon as it pops, the first thing that happens is any smart investors are going to sit back, put their money in a suitcase, in the mattress, and just wait and just see what happens. That then cools the market down. That then has ripple effects all the way out to the people that make the nails to build houses. And then that recession comes in, and then it takes about a year for that to happen. And then all of a sudden, these investors start pulling their money out of the mattress and buying real estate again. And then hopefully at that point, it'll level off. But I think we're about to go to the top of the highest mountain, and then we're going to go down the backside like a luge until we hit the bottom. That's what I see coming.
Yeah. Well, they said it wasn't going to happen again. So I don't, there are a lot of...
It's never going to be a 2008.
It'll be...
We're being guided by our own forces, the buyers and the sellers. Back then, we're being trampled by government policies, bad government policies, that we had no control over. This we have control over. We can decide to pay this for a house or not. So I think that we'll never see it as bad as we did.
A part of that rubber band effect, like what you were talking about, is the expectation of the buyer to make a return on their investment in real estate that is steroided by the current environment has got to change. Investors, and now we're speaking to our listener again, investors have to realize that there really is a long game in real estate ownership. And the short game, which is what, has driven this current marketplace for the last 2 or 3 years, the whole flip game, a lot of this panic buying has to do with people thinking that they can turn a faster profit on real estate now versus what they're seeing in the stock market, which is completely true. I don't know if you follow the Dow at all, but the last couple of months in the Dow, the whole Dow has seen maybe at max half a point, fluctuation upward, very little fluctuation downward. But then there have been several weeks where it's just been flat. So, as far as the short term return, people are not seeing it in the stock market, which, by the way, is something that they predicted back around 2015, 2016, that the gains that people would be getting in the stock market were going to be limited eventually. It's going to hit a high plateau. And so real estate, though, that's the driving factor, I think, for this huge up push in people buying real estate. I'm not concerned about inflation or recession. And I tell my investors that most of mine are buying for long-term hold. And if you're buying long-term hold, who cares? That's like putting your money in a blue stock chip, and you're going to leave it there for 20 years. You don't care if it drops 10 points tomorrow and goes up 30 the next day and then drops 50. Eventually, it always exceeds its previous numbers. So if you're holding, then it doesn't matter. As long as rent comps and appreciation is happening on a piece of property, and you're a long-term hold, 10 years, 8 years, 10 years down the road, you're going to be fine regardless of what happens in the economy. I just had a random thought. These can be scary. This is good. This is sort of a parallel track to what we're talking about right now. One of the things that you and I have been talking about, and really I have been telling people about because they were not aware of it, is the whole increase in capital gains tax on any 1031 exchange that's over $500,000. If that passes. If it passes. But let me tell you something. Here's something good that could come out of it, because I love where you were. We were talking about long-term buy and hold, right? Let's say we're talking about a 10-year hold, okay? So in a 10-year hold, right now we have this current president, right? And we know what his fiscal policy is. And we know that he's using executive power, even more than the previous outgoing president. So he's making all of these fiscal policy changes and increases in taxes and change to the tax code or whatever, just from the president's office with his pen. He's not going to be the same president. No. And it's not even going to be the same political party in office in 10 years. And so if your goal is buy and hold, then you shouldn't be afraid.
Never.
Well, now check this out. Of the 1031 exchange tax, which he's proposing over $500,000, because that will get overturned by the time you sell that property.
If anything, through the last 3 presidents, the one true thing I've learned is that the next incoming president can undo every single thing the previous president did in 30 days with a stroke of a pen.
Right.
So you're right. So let's say Biden does this, and let's say inflation hits the roof, and then we go into another big recession.
Sure.
Unemployment shoots through the roof. None of that matters, because 8 years from now, if that happens, 8 years from now, you're going to have a completely different president with a completely different economic outlook who will go back in and executive order everything back the other way and maybe even better. And that's when you want to, unfortunately, in the real estate game, the government has a lot to do with your success.
Sure. In
the real estate game. But if you're a Chicken Little who, at the sign of the first dark cloud, you're going to start liquidating, thinking you got to get out from under it, I think that's a foolish way to go.
The other thing too about the Chicken Littles that you're talking about, those people might be listening to us right now, but those really,
it's not an insult; it's a mentality, right?
Well, yeah.
I mean, we watch out in the stock market all the time.
Sure.
If I had $100,000 in the stock market and somebody says, "Oh, we're headed for a deep dive,"
get out now.
You know what I'd do?
What?
I'd leave it. Right. Go ahead and leave it. And then when it bottoms out, I'll go to my savings account and I'll buy up all the cheap stock and add it to what I already got and let it ride back up. Because eventually it's going to come back up and it's going to hit a point that it was at before and go up. Sure. So I think in real estate and any investment, if you long-term it, it really doesn't matter who's in the White House. It doesn't really matter what policies they put into motion to executive order. Right. You're always going to come out good. Right. In the long run.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think one of the things that's really about to change the market is something that passed yesterday. I shouldn't say passed. It was a judgment made by a federal judge in Washington, D.C., which overturned the CDC Eviction Moratorium for the entire nation.
Yep.
And it basically said
it's going to be challenged.
Well, sure, but the smaller circuit courts have already been challenged. We had West Tennessee was in the 6th Circuit Court. I could get this could all be wrong, so I'm not going to try to talk about details. But the point is, the state of Texas, West Tennessee, and Northern Ohio, federal judges did the same thing. They determined that the CDC eviction moratorium was illegal or unconstitutional, and so it was overturned. In all 3 of those districts, that decision was challenged, and then it was upheld in all 3 districts. So there's legal precedent now with 3 smaller districts saying that was upheld, and now with this 4th judge coming out in D.C. saying that it should be banned throughout the entire nation. Will it be challenged? Absolutely. Will it go to the Supreme Court? I've been told from my attorney friends that it will probably not go to the Supreme Court, and the action will be very, very swift.
Well, I hope so. And we've talked about this before, and I'm a firm believer that the CDC has zero authority to tell an investor who's a business owner. Sure. That's no different than the federal government going into Pizza Hut and saying, "Hey, by the way, you've got to eliminate pepperoni from your pizzas, and you must sell them for $5 a piece, or we're going to fine you." They don't have the authority to tell a private business how to run. An investor is a private business. Right. I think they way overstepped their bounds. And the day they put that moratorium in place, I made the statement that that's completely unconstitutional, because you're now forcing a business owner to adhere to something that is going to be detrimental to their business. Now, it was helpful for the tenants, but what did we see? We saw a ton of tenants say, "Oh, well, guess what? I'm just not going to pay rent. I'm going to ride this out until they do finally kick me out." Yep. I had one lady that lived in the house for over a year, never paid a dime in rent. Yeah. Because the CDC said she couldn't be evicted. Right. So and that poor investor lost his shirt, his tennis shoes, and possibly half his underwear. Right. Ooh. On that deal. Yeah. And I've met that guy. Yeah. So, all right. So here's kind of what I'm getting at. One of the things that has limited the amount of product on the market has been that these
non-paying tenants have locked up these properties. They can't be evicted. Investors generally don't want to purchase properties with a non-paying tenant, right? Like that's just kind of a losing proposition. So it is that lack of product has driven up the prices, right? And no buyer is like, oh yeah, I'll pay more next month for the same property. They're waiting. A lot of people are waiting for those prices to regulate, to come down, to normalize. And so my gut and my hope, I'm sad to say, for people who honestly cannot pay their rent, and I really hope that they're taking advantage of the programs that are out there. There are a lot of really wonderful programs. In fact, just real quick, Biden's bailout, right, actually has the best version of the rent assistance program. And his version will pay out 85% of the rent that's owed. So to any homeowner, if they're willing to take a 15% discount on the rent that they are owed, that program will pay that. One of the roadblocks in there, and this we're going to have to talk about this later, that I experienced, with the 15 or 20 houses that I had that didn't pay rent over the course of the last year, is that a lot of people chose not to pay rent. Like you said, they took advantage of the law. But here's the deal: they didn't qualify for the assistance because they made too much money. Right? So what does that say? Yeah, what does that say in that situation?
Well, I'm going to go back to the beginning of this process. Okay. When they rolled out the COVID restrictions and the masks and shutting businesses down and just turning the entire country upside down, it seems to me that process was, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it seems to me that process, when it went into effect, opened the door for the liberal thinking politicians to then begin to insert more government programs, more assistance to people, and making people more dependent on that government sending them that check or putting a program in place to protect them.
Absolutely.
So my hope is, when we drove to Gatlinburg up in Sevierville, when we went to Sevierville, you wouldn't believe the amount of huge manufacturing facilities with giant billboards now hiring $17 an hour, $10,000 signing bonus, because an average person is getting almost $4,000 in assistance.
Right.
And you put that against a guy who was working at a warehouse,
right,
making, probably bringing home $4,000 gross and putting $3,200 in the bank. He's making more money sitting at home than he would be going back to work. So we've got a lot of very big problems that we're about to start. The cracks are about to start showing. Right. And I think it starts with these checks that are going out.
Yeah.
Because you're making people dependent on the government. So what happens when those checks go away? And then all of a sudden, all these jobs that are available are no longer available. Now you've got folks that are even more dependent on the government to house them and feed them and pay their bills.
Right.
I think we're headed for on that sector of our economy. I think we're headed for a tough time.
One real quick note, just personal note. I work out at a gym, near where I live, and I am seeing more and more overqualified people working at that gym as a second job, as a third job, and the reason that I think that they're doing that is because they're grabbing that job while that job is there to be had. I think if you're in the United States, if you're just now getting out of college and you're not currently employed, if you're not working and you need to be working and you're relying on that government check, you better go get that job soon, because it's just like what you said. Pretty soon we're going to see overqualified people working jobs that are beneath their skill level, because those are the jobs that are available.
Well, in unemployment, you can get an average of $980 a week, tax-free.
Now, right.
So if you were making $3,500 a month and now you're picking up almost $4,000 a month, why in the world would you get out of bed and go to work?
Right.
And what is a timeline of unemployment?
Well, the extended unemployment benefits end on June the 30th. Right now,
and they need to end as soon as they end. I mean, our unemployment.
I think it needs to go back to needs-based.
Unemployment's so high right now because I can tell you probably half of those people are just staying home because they can.
Sure.
Right.
I'd be investing that. I would be using one of these penny stock apps and just making money off of the money you're giving me.
We've unfortunately gotten to a society that if it's free, they'll take it.
Right.
If it's free, I want it.
Right.
And that's sad. Anyway.
Well, we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah.
June the 30th. I bet I've got $100 on the table right now that it's going to be extended.
No.
Yeah, I think that's what's going to happen.
I'm not going to take that bet because you're probably right.
I think I'm right.
Biden's the president. It will probably be extended out to 2030.
Here we go.
Yeah.
And now, Neighborhood Chat.
Did you enjoy your time away?
I did.
Good.
We went to Smoky Mountains. We're a partner out of Louisiana. We're looking at doing container cabins up in the mountains. Awesome. So we went up to look at property, and one particular piece of property I was telling Richard before we got started. Yeah. So we got up on the ridge. Trey and I we were looking at the property as it went down, but I saw a gravel road way down there, and I knew if I could find where the entrance was, we can get down there and kind of get a good look up at the property. Because, I mean, you're talking about a 120-foot ridge where you'd put cabins. Right. So we drove down. I found it, put it in four-wheel drive, went down to the bottom, and then all of a sudden the gravel road, about one car width wide, kept going up the mountain. So I decided to follow it up and find a place to turn around and come back down. I figured if I got to the top of that mountain, I could see across to this range. We got up to the top, and there's this old shack with a bunch of old cars and dog pens outside with pit bulls. So I immediately looked at this scenario and said, this is probably not a good idea. We're in the middle of nowhere, top of a mountain. We just ran up on somebody's property. So I turn around and I drive back down the mountain. I get to the bottom, and I stopped to get out and look. And all of a sudden, this old truck comes blazing down the gravel road, and this big 300-something pound, 6'7" guy goes, "Boy, you need something?"
Wow.
I was just, my sphincter went, I was like, "No, sir. No, sir. You lost." I told him what we were doing. Sure. And of course, he threw out some profane words about his servitude and how he's not giving it up. And I said, "Look," I said, "if we do something here, this gravel road is just going to be an entranceway. So this will still be your driveway. We're not going to take it from you." Right. And then about that time, his wife turned and smiled at me with not a tooth in her head. It was we drove out of there, and I was like, "You can't make this up. This would have been a great reality TV clip of moonshiners." Right. So I assumed that he was probably got a little meth lab up there somewhere going on or something, because he was very nervous that we were there. Right. Very nervous.
Well, your vehicle almost looks like a government vehicle. Yeah. I mean, it's a very large
white four-wheel drive. Yeah. It was a great trip though. Good. We had fun. Good. Got to see some bears walking through our backyard. Yeah. Then I guess we ended up coming back a day late because we got 5 inches of rain, washed the roads out, shut down the gates. We couldn't even get down the mountain. Wow. Lost power for a day and a half. Wow. So we made it back 10 o'clock last night.
You know, it's nice to be stuck in a cabin on the top of a mountain with somebody that you're madly in love with without any power.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Trey.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Trey.
I didn't know you had.
But yeah. So it wasn't quite as romantic as you'd think it would. But the worst part for me was, I work nonstop. Sure. I'm always working on the boat wherever I'm at. I had no internet. So I've got people texting me about offers and look at this property, and I'm like, I can't do anything. Yeah. So it took them till I think it was yesterday morning before the power came back on.
Wow.
Well, let's go ahead into the put out, because I've done several of these recently, even during the moratorium. We put notices on the door. We contacted the tenant, and she's avoiding us like the plague, won't respond to us. And she's assuming that because of the CDC's moratorium, she's just going to ride this out as far as she can. So I went and met with an attorney, the one that Aaron knows, who's no longer with us now. I know. And services are actually Tuesday, by the way. So in this situation, he said, "Well, Brett, the moratorium on evictions does not address abandonment." Okay. So as a property owner, if your property's deemed abandoned, then you have the right to protect your asset. There's no legislation or CDC can tell you cannot protect your asset. So I said, "Well, she's not responding. I'm putting notices on. I put a notice on her door every day, 7 days in a row, and they're all still there, which means she hasn't gone in the house." So he says, "We'll document that." So as I documented it, there's kind of the negative, and yeah, maybe I didn't. I did it during the Christmas holidays, so
I'm glad we're not like this.
Listen,
is okay.
Listen, right. And I talked to Leonard about that. I said, "Leonard, it's the Christmas holidays. It's very possible she's home visiting." He goes, "Brett, she hadn't paid in 7 months." So he put the notices on the door. We'll go 14 days, and we did. And then I gave him all the documents. I gave him all the times it was posted. I took pictures every day of the notices posting up on the door. And then we noticed, he just said, "Fine, then you deem it abandoned." We did. We changed the locks and put her stuff on the street. The thing is she's still this day. I sent her notice and gave her my number. Said, "If you want your items, let me know."
Where's your stuff? Where's the stuff?
It's gone now. Put it on the sidewalk, and because she wouldn't respond, put it on the sidewalk. And of course, it got picked through like a dead carcass. They picked it out and took everything off that lot. But we deemed it abandoned, and that's how we got her out. So when you come to this issue of setouts, I understand you've got this, I won't call him what I think about him, politician who has now decided that we want to end putouts, meaning we don't want to put stuff on the street. They make these decisions without determining how it affects the business owner, the property owner. While, yes, it's not attractive to drive down a street and see someone's lifelong belongings piled up in the front yard, I get that. But what's the solution? You're going to tell the business owner or the property owner no longer can you put stuff on the street. Now you've got to hire a moving company and move the tenant who hasn't paid you in 6 months, move their items to another location for them. That just doesn't make any sense to me, and it's never going to work. It just can't work, and I'll never support it. And who made that? Who's talking about that? Do you know?
So let's read the article. It's very, very brief. So this is this last Tuesday, May the 4th. Council members took their first look at a proposal by JB Smiley Jr. Now there you go. That's the first reason why you don't accept anything from a guy named JB Smiley.
Well,
JB Smiley has been he's been a councilman for a long time.
Again, he's been a lifelong politician.
All right, and so what he's trying to do is he's trying to bar landlords or property owners from eviction setouts where the tenant's belongings are put in a public right of way, like a sidewalk or other public property, for non-payment of rent. Now, let's just stop right there. We do that right now, okay? And so every eviction that I've ever performed, every set out, and there haven't been a ton, we've had generally very good luck. I've probably, in the 20 years that I've been doing this, almost 20 years, probably less than 100 actual set outs.
Right.
Okay? That's not bad.
No.
The thing is, the tenant's property is set on the curb, and it does interrupt the sidewalk. So that's what this says, is that they don't want the tenant's belongings put in a public right-of-way like a sidewalk or other public property for non-payment of rent. The other public property would be like an apartment complex.
Right.
So apartment complexes right now, in order to eliminate this same issue, have the responsibility privately of disposing of that personal property during a set out. Usually there is a garbage area, with several dumpsters. And so you'll often see, when you drive through an apartment complex, mattresses, beds, furniture, and it's all set up against that dumpster. And so, the former tenants are able to go get their personal property if they want it. If not, it's already there and it's ready to go to the trash. They spoke about it, and the ordinance, which they're proposing, would require landlords to take the belongings of those evicted to a landfill, donate them to a charity, or something similar. So this is actually good news, I think.
Well, but here's the situation.
It does get in. There are tenant rights that are interrupted with this.
Yeah, I agree.
Obviously,
but in order to haul it to a landfill, you're talking about the contents of a home.
Sure.
That's another large cost for now the landlord to pay to evict a tenant who just stopped paying.
Sure.
You've already got the court costs, the eviction costs, attorney's fees, which you'll never get back from the tenant. You can sue them all day long. You'll end up spending 3 times what they owe you. So it doesn't make sense. So they eat that cost. And now you're going to add on another $500, $600, $700, $800 for someone to go fill a trailer full of their junk and take it to the landfill and pay dumping fees.
Which I do anyway.
You do.
Yeah.
Now, if there's in order for this proposal to make any sense to me, that Mr. Smiley should be talking to donation centers in advance, saying, we would love your support on this, but you would need to put a program together to make yourself available so that when there's an eviction happening and a set out, you notify these people, and guess who? They then send their crews in free of charge to the homeowner, the property owner, to clean that house out and take all those belongings as a donation, write a receipt to the property owner, give them a benefit for her doing this.
Right.
But have that set up. Don't just pass something and say, okay, here it is. You have to follow it. By the way, you need to figure out how to make it work. I think if he wants this to work and hopefully get support of, I hope there's some council members that are saying, nah, this is just too vague, that you go to donation centers in advance and say, we want to do this. It'll benefit you, but you bunt the cost of going and picking up the product, the stuff. And you do a set out date on tomorrow at 9 a.m. They show up one of their big trucks. They have 4 guys that walk in and clean the house out and take off with it.
Right. So let's talk about the current law in this situation. The current law is that the personal belongings of the tenant, which you have set out, are not allowed to stay on the curb longer than, I believe it's 7 days.
Yes.
A lot of times you'll go ahead and get a notice from the city if you do a set out 3 days into the personal property being on the curb. Now, for somebody like, again, most of our listeners have no idea what Memphis is like. Enterprise, really, we do our best to manage property in decent parts of town and nice parts of town, blue collar parts of town, but we don't do low income. Okay, that's always been a personal thing. When you go into low income neighborhoods, you are going to see every other house, not during the COVID eviction moratorium, of course, but during a normal economy, every other house, as you drive down the street, would have personal belongings on the curb because
some of that's just their patio furniture in the front yard.
But I'm talking
about. In other words,
about
some people just put stuff in their front yard just to leave it there.
That's true.
So, and in some of these areas, that's pretty common.
Right.
So
what this man is trying to do, I believe,
he's got the right. He's got a good idea.
He's got a good motivation.
Listen, good ideas without figuring out how to put it into functional practice,
right,
end up being bad ideas. And that's what I'm saying. If he would just take the time to set up the program properly and have, what's the big donation center right here on the corner from the office? Goodwill.
Yeah.
Go to Goodwill and say, look, for every set out, we would love for you guys to come pick up all the stuff. And you take it back, take what you want and sell it. What you don't want, throw it away. But it's you contract with the city. We're going to give every one of these to you, but you have to show up and get it on a designated time.
See, I don't see how
that would be perfect. I would be in support of that.
Yeah. I don't see how that is going to fly with what the rights of the owner of that property is. Like, I believe
on a set out day, though, you're just putting it on the curb.
You're just moving the location.
Yeah.
Right.
Typically on a set out, you hire some guys to go in and move stuff to the curb.
But what you're talking about now is like contracting, through a city ordinance, having the capacity to contract with someone who will literally remove that personal property from the home, and it's gone. Like,
no, but listen, there is I think there's also an ordinance in place that gives the property owners or law so much time to come back and reclaim those items.
I'll put it this way. What if that's what the set out is for?
What if the donation center says, okay, we'll take it a step further. Not only will we go pick up everything, you then tell that property tenant that it's at our facility and they've got 7 days to come get what they want or come pick it up.
Sounds like a nightmare.
No. If you look this donation center up here, they function this way. I mean, you can call them and say, hey, I've got an attic full of junk.
Right.
And they'll come through and clean it all out for you. 1-800 Junk. Contract with them.
Absolutely.
Right? The city can write them a check.
But the city's not going to write a check. See, because as you've already pointed out at the beginning of this conversation, the burden is on the landlord. It's on the property owner.
So this is going to turn out to be a bad idea because this guy's not doing his homework. He's not putting a plan in place. He's doing something that's going to make him popular with constituents in his district who are probably, most of them are renters.
Well, okay, so let's continue to read toward the bottom of this article because this is really important. It talks about how the City Beautiful Commission, which is very, very important to the city of Memphis, it prevents urban blight. Okay.
Yeah, I get that.
It prevents this sort of like messy, trashy look, to our city. And so the City Beautiful Commission is really, it's dual purposed or really triple purposed. Okay. It's got ordinances that private citizens have to follow. Okay. And that's what this would be. Mm-hmm. It also has a significant waste disposal team here in the city, and there's solid waste disposal. You can call in and have large items removed from your front yard. They make you set that item out or those items out the day before trash pickup. If those items sit on the curbs, such as similar to what he's proposing with someone's personal property, for longer than a week, then you will be fined and taken to, and this is the third point, environmental court. And so our environmental court with code enforcement here in Memphis is extremely strong. If there's a ruling that comes down in environmental court because you've got a trashy backyard or you have junk cars, in your driveway that are causing, it's just unsightly, then that environmental court will fine you. Okay. And eventually will put a lien on your property where that trash is. And so I think what JB Smiley is trying to do is...
I still can't trust a guy named JB Smiley.
JB Smiley.
Sounds like a used car salesman to me. Welcome to JB Smiley's car lot.
hey, he's a councilman, not me. So, I mean, obviously he's got some
Keep in
cred.
mind, I was in small town politics.
Oh, I know.
I understand the makeup of those people. I understand how they think. I understand I hope his heart's in the right place. I get it. I mean, I do the same thing. I drive down the interstate in Lamar, and you look at all the trash and just junk, and it looks crappy. I get it. And I would love nothing more than that for that all to be cleaned up.
Right.
But good ideas that end up costing the property owner more money,
right,
and fees and more headaches and more liability, right, to follow all these rules to make sure you do it right. I'm totally against that. If you want to make an ordinance or a law or whatever you're going to do to address this, you need to write the entire thing out. You need to have a plan from A to Z.
There's a proposal. I mean, it's a solid ordinance proposal.
His proposal is that the property owner is responsible for hauling it away to a dump site.
Yeah. So, okay, one last important point. It says the city council last changed the city ordinance in 2005 when they enacted the requirement that belongings put on the street in an eviction must be boxed or bagged in a neat and organized manner. Now, that lasts, by the way, even if you do that, that's going to last for all of 2 hours.
Oh,
absolutely. And then it's just going to be scattered all over the place.
That's, like I said, it's a great idea, but all great ideas that end up being bad ideas is because someone didn't think through the long-term process. Right. They think it's a great idea. It sounds good on paper. It's going to look shiny as an ordinance, and people in my district are going to love me because if they get evicted, their stuff's not going to be tossed out.
Sure.
All that. But again, you've got to think on step 2.
Right. Well, step 2 is going to cost a lot of money.
Absolutely. You're going to end up spending $1,200 to pay a crew to go bag up stuff, box stuff up, move it out, and then haul it off somewhere.
Right. I
still think that city contract call 1-800-GOT-JUNK. Say we're going to give you everything that comes out of. Just show up with your truck.
We'll just change the name of the city to 1-800-GOT-JUNK. I mean,
if you want your streets beautiful, you're gonna have to play with the devil, right?
Right.
You have to dance with the devil.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that I feel like, as I'm rounding out my position on this, I feel like is going to be a problem is that when you set a tenant's personal property outside of the property, you change the locks, right? They no longer have access to get into the property. You are giving them the opportunity to come and collect their things. And it's not my responsibility, once we set it out there. My concern is that if we, by adding greater complication to the law in this regard, specifically when it comes to set out, we are going to be, like you said, causing greater
harm to the property owner.
Yeah, well, and liability.
Who should be
protected?
Should be more protected.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, listen, I get it. Glenn and I did loss mitigation for a long time, and we dealt with hardships and people being, losing their homes and being evicted because a spouse got sick or they lost their job, whatever. And there are some true sad stories out there, but let's just face it. We're in Memphis, and there are a lot of deadbeats that just don't pay their rent.
Sure.
Right. And going a step further to coddle them out of the home instead of just doing the way we've been doing it is going to have a negative impact on the property owner. But there's a simple solution. His ordinance is going to say out on city property.
Okay.
Nothing can prevent them from putting it in the yard.
Right.
On that owner's property.
Off of the sidewalk.
Then, if they wanted, they can take them to environmental court. But by that time that happens, that stuff will be gone anyway.
Hopefully.
So,
yeah.
I do have a guy that charges me $500 and he cleans the whole house out, sweeps it and everything, hauls off everything. He takes them as donations. I may bring him on the show, sometime and
I think that'd be really interesting to the listener to hear what a set out looks like, because everybody has this horrible image in their mind of how it goes.
It's not pretty.
Yes. If let's just paint a picture here. If the tenant is to the point where they've not paid their rent for so many months that a landlord has taken them to court and has required, forced them out more or less, and the judge has approved this, that's the environment that you're stepping into. Is that person who's been a non-payer this entire time. So yeah, most likely their home is not orderly,
No, it's not. And it makes it worse when the sheriff's department's there holding the tenant back while people are moving their stuff out to the yard. It is. It's not a great scene. But at the same time, we've got to come to a point where we understand that, yes, tenants have rights. And and a lot of these tenants' rights acts that have been passed in the state of Tennessee were from scrupulous dirtbag slumlords creating problems for the tenants. But now we've reached a point where those tenants' rights are being used as an unfair disadvantage to the property owner.
Sure.
And those tenants are using those to their advantage instead of, and I had it happen all the time. When we were doing when Glenn and I were doing loss mitigation, all we had to do was walk into court and say, Your Honor, we need a 30-day extension on this eviction. And the first time you walk in and ask for it, the judge grants it automatically because of Tenants Rights Act. Right. So that was due, we were fighting a bank trying to evict someone from a home they foreclosed on. But now you're taking that same concept and you're doing it against a property owner and a tenant. So I know for a fact that tenant has rights to walk into court and say, and just get 30-day extension with no reason whatsoever. Right. And just stay there another 30 days. So I think we reached a point now where our own policies to protect tenants are going to be creating a disadvantage for property owners, and this is just going to go one more step too far. Right. My opinion. Yeah. Well, we'll see where it goes. Like you said, hopefully there are some cooler heads on our city council, and we'll find out.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Curtain podcast, your real-world guide to real estate investment and property management. Be sure to subscribe at BehindTheCurtainPodcast.com. And if you'd like to learn more about Enterprise Property Management's real estate services, please visit us on the web at EPMRealestate.com. This has been a Sound Ideas Group production for Enterprise Property Management, Inc.